History of History.
Okay, Volume 2 on History of Ancient Stuff. And this is Ancient Sexuality. So, first, what is sexuality? Let's ask that question. It's sexual orientation, sexuality, gender. These things are in front of us 24/7. They are part of the American zeitgeist, the world zeitgeist right now. So, first of all, descriptions of sexual identification in society by society. Okay. And here we have to distinguish between actual biological sex, in which the penis and the vagina are evolutionary developments, okay, and the much broader and much more interesting and much more important for humans concept of gender, which is itself entirely socially constructed. So, despite modern arguments to the contrary, that there was a traditional past in which sex, biological sex, and gender were inextricably linked forever and ever and ever, that is not so. Gender is incredibly fluid because really, gender encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses what someone can do in society. Can they own property? Can they will their property to their partner? Can they represent themselves before the law? Can they live on their own without having a minder living there with them? So, gender is very fluid. So, this video is not about modern sexuality. It's about ancient sexuality. And really, sexuality and gender are words that can be used interchangeably. And so we're going to start out looking at prehistoric sexuality, okay? Before the agricultural and revolution in animal husbandry, how did people understand where babies came from? And how did people orient themselves sexually? Can we see this? And really, the big scholar that we're going to rely on here is Marija Gimbtas. Was an incredible phenomenon, and she's the base plate for it, and the reactions against her, and then the uh, developments from her work. Okay, and then we'll move from the prehistoric into historic sexuality, and we're going to look at ancient sexuality as a way of inwardly and outwardly expressing one's biological and gender roles in the community, the family, society. It's not really the same as modern sexuality. The hierarchies of the ancient world were much more rigid than the hierarchies of the modern world. Uh, Society, politics, community, family, uh, really the only places where you don't see huge rigid hierarchies are in religious societies where there's an awful lot more sharing of power between, say, men and women. Okay, um, but even in these rigid hierarchies, there's transgression that is occurring. Okay, and the modeling and the performing of one's own gender in public. There in the ancient world, there are places where there were fairly egalitarian, like Egypt, and then there were others where there were incredibly rigid. So we're going to be asking a lot of questions here. Questions like, How did the ancients understand their sexuality? How'd they write about it? How'd they create images of it? Or what kind of images did they create? What were the myths, stories that involve sexuality? Because there are a lot of them, okay? And especially once you get to the Greeks, uh, there's a lot of really weird Greek stuff out there in the past that we just, it doesn't get talked about. And what are the key themes and tropes of these stories? And honestly, this is a pretty good antidote to the idea that there is a traditional gender role in society, because once you start to really peel back what's going on in the ancient and the prehistoric world, you start to see that gender is extremely fluid, and it's very, very interesting. Okay, so how are we going to go about this? So, in this video, we're going to use some case studies. I like case studies because they allow us to take deep dives into particular places at particular times and to be able to really get a good look at how things, whatever you're studying, worked. The problem with case studies, of course, is that sometimes you're studying something that is not representative of anything. It's just an anomalous situation. On the other hand, often if you do enough case studies, you can build up a picture of what's going on. So we're going to use several case studies here, and we're going to then extrapolate from them. So the first one is going to be the prehistoric sets. And this is going to be largely based upon Marija Gimbtas' goddess theories and the reactions to them, and the modifications of them. So that's the prehistoric world. That's one. The second one will be the historic world, and we're going to start out with ancient Egypt. When we say ancient Egypt, remember we're talking millennia. Okay, this is a long, long, long time, and a lot of changes go on it. So we're going to look at that. The second one we're going to look at is Mesopotamian specifically, because remember, Mesopotamia is not a country; it is a geographic location, okay, a welter of city states. And we're going to look at Babylon specifically. Why? Because of Hammurabi's Law Code. That gives us a lot of evidence for who can do what in society. And then finally, we're gonna go to Athens, and we are going to look at the development of Athenian democracy and sexuality within it. There are a lot of plays, there are a lot of written accounts, there are lots of fragmentary accounts, there are lots of epigraphic accounts, that is, inscriptions, and then we're going to cross index it and compare it with Sparta, and then a little bit with Thebes. Okay, and then we'll stop with some conclusions and then a bibliography. So, buckle up, here we go. So, part one, prehistory, goddess theory. So, prehistoric Europe, as the archaeologist Marija Gimbtas called it, quote unquote, old Europe. So, who was this woman? She was Lithuanian. She grew up in Soviet occupied world, then it was Nazi occupied world. She got married, she had kids. They escaped to Austria. They escaped to the United States. Her husband was an architect, began a career as an engineer. She had a terrifyingly difficult time with the American academic patriarchy. and but eventually she produced some monumentally important and groundbreaking studies, many of which are incredibly controversial, but they are fantastic. The first one, 1965, Age cultures and Central, Bronze Age cultures of Central and Eastern Europe. 1974, the goddesses and gods of old Europe, 7000 to 3500 BC, myths and legends and cult images. Then there's a 1981 uh, excavation write up of the Grotta Scaloria. That's it. And then there's 1989, The Language of the Goddess, Unearthing the Hidden Symbols of Western Civilization. That one was a powder keg or a load of dynamite. And then there's 1986's excavation write up at Sitagroy Volume 1. She edited it with others. And then 1989's Echelaion, a Neolithic settlement in Thessaly, 6400 to 5600 BC. And that from basically there from 65 to 89, those are the giant monumental cornerstone treatises. And these are hugely significant things. Okay. So first of all, her assessment of things. First, she's a very interdisciplinarian. Uh, she's has a very firm grasp of ethnography, of folklore, of archaeology, of history. When she was doing this, okay, because she starts out, remember, in World War II, when she's a, 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 a high school student, she would skip school and go out and collect folk songs out in the countryside. Just ride her bicycle out into the countryside and collect folk songs from various villages. And she saved all these things, and they became these kind of a bank of information for her. So this folklore information was deep, and it's the potential analysis that you could drive for was huge. Okay, so her concept of quote unquote old Europe was based on an enormous amount of evidence. Digs at sites, like as I just said, the Sinagroy and the Achilleon sites, an analysis of artifacts that were already in museums that had been dug up in some cases a century ago, and nobody knew what the heck they were. So they stuck them in a box in a museum somewhere, and sometimes they're even on display, labeled or something like that. And some other things just straight up found in dig sites that were happening at the time. So she posits the existence of a prehistoric goddess worshipping women ruled society located in a quote unquote proto European homeland, uh, somewhere probably in the Pontic Caspian steppe, somewhere around 4000 BC, though there is that rival theory of the Anatolian origins of this, coming from somewhere around 8000 BC. That's the Çatalhöyük school of thought. And this characterized by goddess images and a lack of walls and weapons around their settlements. Artifacts indicating women in important positions. These people, she argues, are very religious. They're earth and water goddess worshippers. And that a group of people coming out of Central Eurasia. They're a chariot riding, sky god worshipping people, who she calls the Kurgans, destroyed this earth and water goddess worshipping women run society and ultimately gave us the Indo-European languages, because that's what these Kurgans are supposed to be carrying with them on their chariots as they rampage across the countryside. Okay, so this word Kurgan has to be explained here, because the first time I ever heard that word was when I was an undergraduate in the movie Highlander, because the bad guy's called the Kurgan. I was like, wow, Kurgan, what the hell's that? And then I saw it was in a atlas, a series of Kurgans out in Central Asia, and I'm like, I thought that was a guy. What the heck? And no, it turns out that Kurgan means tumulus or a tomb mound in Turkish. Okay, so the Kurgan hypothesis, and that's kind of associated with that Anatolian Çatalhöyük idea of the origins of this. This Kurgan hypothesis is that these tumuli in central Eurasia, which you're seeing pictures of them right now, that these tumuli were the products of this sky god worshipping, chariot riding, horse domesticating, male centered warrior aristocracy that spoke Indo European languages and invaded and crushed the goddess worshippers who were living in Europe and brought the Indo European languages to Europe. And then she posits that the survival of this is Knossos, the Minoan civilization there. So she arrives at this hypothesis. First of all, there's two big ones here. Okay, there's two big points. One is that there is this old Europe, and second, that it's destroyed by these Kurgans. Okay, so you got to be able to demonstrate these two things. So she was really able to really come very close to demonstrating that there were these old Europe settlements. Her analysis, really, of these, the goddess figures, she would call them, in art history, they're called Venus figures. Okay, and I'm showing some of them to you right here. Okay, these are not portraits. There are thousands of these things. We know what ancient prehistoric portraiture. There we go. There we go. That's the word. Portraiture looked like, and this ain't it. Okay, this is something very different. And so she is giving us a great deal of insight into this by interpreting these objects not simply in isolation, because really what had happened to a lot of these Venus figures is they just got stuck in museums in the prehistory section as a Venus figure. What's its role? What's its function? Maybe it's religious. That's about it. So what she's really arguing it is that there are thousands of these things across Eurasia, okay, and that these things are essentially religious totem figures for a network of goddess worshipping peoples who may not have been politically or socially related to one another, but there is this religious underpinning, which then in her later work, she's going to have this whole business about the language of the goddess, and these are prehistoric peoples, so they don't. There's no papyrus. There's no epigraphies, inscriptions on stone. No, what they there's inscriptions on stone, but they're like chevrons and whorls and stuff like that. So it's not really writing, and so she has a whole concept of how to interpret these things, which is fantastic and incredible. If it's true, it's been attacked so many times. There's a lot of stuff where her historical and anthropological and archaeological imagination is so powerful, and it's so wonderful to pull it apart. But it's also insanely controversial. Um, so she takes this analysis of these things, and the lack of male figures, okay, the prominence of goddess figures. So this is imparts in her mind to an idea of a gradual understanding of the reproductive process that initially early peoples, prehistoric peoples, didn't know that sex made babies. Okay, this may have been a mystery that women kept to themselves. Men could only guess at. Some of them figured it out, but most of them didn't. And really, it was only in the domestication of animals, where, especially when you had, because think about it, a 9 month gestation period. Now, how long after sex does a woman show she's pregnant? You may not even connect pregnancy to sex. So Gimbuta's argument is that there's an interpretation that says that that pregnancy is divine, that the goddess gave you babies, and that women of this are important in this position in society because they make babies, and the goddess favors them or not. So the women that don't have sex, well, the goddess didn't favor them. That's how they would interpret it. So right there, that is an image of a complete dissociation from biology. So any 2023 idea that gender is locked into some kind of traditional thing that's based on sex, well, folks, what the fuck happens if they don't know sex is how you make babies? Well, guess what? You still have gender, you just make it up differently. Wow. It's amazing. It is amazing. And really, it's only when you get the domestication of animals with shorter gestation periods where you start to see, uh, hey, look, you'll have a shepherd out there and he's raising goats, and the goat has like a short gestation period. And sees the goats having sex, and then sees the goats pregnant, and he starts seeing it. And that shepherd's going to be like, hey, there's sex. Sex has something to do with babies. And I have sex, so I have something to do with babies. So once men get that shit into their brains, you can't get it out. Then all of a sudden it becomes my baby. Okay, so her theories are very controversial. Okay, there's a bunch of reasons for that, and we'll get into it. She understood many languages, okay? Beyond English and Lithuanian, there's Russian, there's Greek, there's a whole host of Central European language. There's German, there's French, there's Italian. Okay, she's the whole ethnography, folklore, local history, and interpretation of symbols and glyphs of old Europe to be a readable language or written code, which he claimed to have deciphered. Okay, and these kinds of things, this got her into a lot of hot water. Um, but this stuff had been done before in some forms, and done afterwards as well. The Brothers Grimm did a lot of this kind of stuff. There's a lot of 19th century people that were going out and collecting folklore and then extrapolating about it. She's doing it much more systematically and scientifically, but they're still doing that. And then the idea in history that you can actually use folklore to elucidate or illuminate or whatever the fuck verb you want. Stuff going on. The Robert Darnton's Peasants Tell Tales and The Great Cat Massacre are both fantastic works in which he is using. You have a historian who's using folklore, folk tales, Little Red Riding Hood, for example, to examine how the non-literate folk would have used a story like that and what it would mean inside of a society. So there are other people that were doing it and are doing it, but um, she was pretty. Her stuff is very new, very new, or very different, I should say. It was new at the time, that's for sure. Okay, so why so controversial? Okay, so first of all, we have to understand that it's not just her arguments. Her arguments are definitely pushing against some pretty hairy stuff. Okay, but she's a foreigner coming to the United States. She's Lithuanian. She's coming out of Nazi Germany. She's a woman coming into American academia, which is almost entirely white male. Her experience at Harvard, she managed to get a research position there while her husband was working as an engineer in Boston. And she was given a post that was unpaid. She got a table in the library where she was allowed to translate documents and work on research projects, at which she produced several monographs, which the university published, but she did not receive any royalties from. Okay, so basically, um, she was slammed in the face by the patriarchy really hard. Eventually, her marriage failed, and she left for California, and she took up positions out there, and of course, by out there, I mean the University of California at Los Angeles. Okay, thank you, Google, for giving me that. Okay, so she was eventually, after her stuff was published, it was groundbreaking, enormous amount of work. She was well funded. She did a fantastic amount of work, um, but she was critically attacked constantly, and really the reason for this is this she is fighting against white male patriarchy in archaeological academia, um, and pushing against a an idea of a prehistoric Europe, which emphasized the development of warrior aristocracies across the continent. Um, these were popularized in popular texts like Desmond Morris's Naked Ape, which posited this idea of uh, rape as being the main way that disseminated genes across societies. There's a lot of problems with these earlier studies. Um, and then the general women's dominated society really rubbed a lot of scholars the wrong way. And you can look up reactions. I'm posting, or got a picture here of some of the library citations of reactions against her stuff. Okay, so she's challenging all sorts of ideas. Uh, she's challenging the patriarchy uh, in her own world, her academic world, and she's also really challenging it in the ancient or the prehistoric world as well, with her matricentral world. Um, Plus, her evidentiary usage is amazing. Um, so, to give you kind of an example of this from my own universe, I in graduate school and as an undergrad, I had uh, an advisor, professor who was an advisor, former advisor of mine. Um, she was an American woman who's a Japanese history professor, and she related this story to me. This is my rough summation of it. She said, "When I first started going to Japanese archives as a young professor, the Japanese reacted as if a giraffe had just walked in the door. Today," and this I think was about 2014, she said this, "they now react as if a pet dog had wandered in. I'm treated with kindness. I'm a lovable pet. But, you know, I'm still a dog." Okay, so reactions to Marija Gimbtas. There are a lot of them, some of them very positive, some of them very negative. Um, an excellent piece is the LA Times article, The Goddess Theory, by Jacques Leslie. It's from 1989. And he quotes scholars who are her friends and who respect her. Okay, Edgar C. Palom from University of Texas, Keys Ball from UCLA, Ian Hodder from Cambridge University, Alan McFerrin from University of Pitt, and Ruth Tringham from UC Berkeley. And while they all love her and they all respect her, they're all not completely convinced that what she is saying is true. Okay. Her vision of your old Europe as a quilt work of goddess worshipping egalitarian people. Um, Even folks who love her or admire her are skeptical. There are quotes where says that a room on a site, because it is bigger than other rooms, must be a temple. All little figurines with breasts must be goddess figurines. So there is this sense of putting the ideological cart before the horse. In addition to that, in 2014 with the AD&D, yeah, tell what I play, uh, the ancient DNA research, small a DNA, uh, it was done to attempt to demonstrate origins of humans. Essentially, it was the whole part of the human project, and basically, what is able to demonstrate was that yeah, the idea of the Kurgan hypothesis was possibly true. Okay, doesn't explain any other stuff. Doesn't explain the horses or the sky god wielding, sword wielding, bow wielding maniacs. Then the other thing is that she became the huge hero to the second wave feminists and the Wiccan movement. Rihanna Eisler, Starhawk, when she essentially was lambasted from academia in the 1990s, she was received warmly and with great love by the second wave feminists, and there she stayed. Um, so, what can we say about her vision of ancient sexuality? Because this has been a long way around to get to what she thinks. So, this is what she thinks. One, prehistoric sexuality, according to Marija Gimbtas, through me. So I could be getting this fucking wrong, but who the fuck knows? Okay. One, it's egalitarian, in which men and women work and live together. They have societal governance together. They may be all female, but maybe there are some men in there. She doesn't know. Could be a mixed sex system. She says nothing about homosexuality or transsexuality in any of this. Two, it's a peaceful society. No walls, uh, mounds for walls. Um, Anytime you see walls around a city, that means that there's warfare, that they're either protecting themselves from or they're trying to keep the people in. Okay, and in this case, her argument is going to be that a lot of these places don't have walls. Okay, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes there's mounds around the city, and she just says, well, those are mounds. Okay, so, but a peaceful society. So what she's then saying here is that you have an egalitarian, peaceful society in which you almost have a sort of idealized world where everyone respects everyone else and there's no violence. Okay, so do we really think that's true? I mean, it'd be great if it was. And it really gives us, she's the only one that gives us a really complete picture of this place, this time period. So we kind of have to run with it. But that's her vision of ancient sexuality, completely egalitarian and intensely peaceful and respectful. Okay, so this video has got very long, so I'm splitting it into two parts. So the second part will be following up immediately afterwards, and that will cover the rest of the stuff in the outline. So the Egypt and the Greece material will be in the second part. So stay tuned. And thank you very much for listening this far. And thank you very much for paying attention to this shit. And you can donate if you want to, if this has any kind of value to you whatsoever. But like, subscribe, etc. Thank you. Take care, you lovely people.